welcome to this panel about your time at Big Finish. I know you've done Doctor Who in general, and you've done audio visuals, and now we got to Big Finish. I'm going to actually, I'm going to first ask you a little bit to give us, I know you've probably told the story a million times this weekend, but I guess maybe an abridged version of how Big Finish came to be.
I'll do the abridged version rather than the version I did on Friday night.
Yeah, so that people can know.
So, Big Finish came about because I have always enjoyed doing audio drama. And I said to Jason Hay Gallery one day, I'd like to spend all your money. So please let me, and let's set up an audio production company. Let's make Doctor Who on audio. And he said, yes, you can spend all my money. He might not have put it quite like that. I can't remember. And so we went to the BBC. This would be 1996. And we went to the BBC and we said, we'd like to do Doctor Who on audio. And they went, no. Because they were the height of the Paul McGann TV movie. They thought this was going to be the great rebirth of Doctor Who. So they're like, no, we're taking everything in-house and we're not interested in doing that. So we went away, sulking. I mean, not sulking, but disappointed. And I said, well, look, why don't we go to Virgin and Paul Cornell and do Bernie Summerfield, because that's fun and doesn't have all the sort of nightmares that doing Doctor Who would have, dealing with the BBC. So we did. We went to Virgin and they were very happy and Paul was very happy. Boom. And that's how we got the Bernie Summerfield stuff up. And we released our first two Bennies when we got contacted by the BBC, who asked to see us. And we thought, we've done something wrong, we've broken a copyright, oh my God. So we went in for this meeting and these people said to us, we've had a great idea, we think someone should do Doctor Who on audio. And it was the same three people that a year ago told us that this was a terrible idea and they weren't going to do it. And so they said, would you like to do it? We really like your Bernie Summerfield stuff. We can see the potential here. And we said, yes. Well, I said, hang on a minute, this was our idea. Why are you telling us it's your idea? And Jason, ever the professional, just went, shut up, Gary, and yes. And really and truly, it was that easy. And there was no hardship to it, other than the fact that they didn't actually give us a contract for the next 2 years. So we were doing an awful lot of work without a contract from the BBC on sort of faith and hope and charity. And we got everyone on board straight away. Colin, Peter, Sylvester, no problems. All companions, no problems. Paul took a bit longer. Well, we didn't go to Paul straight off anyway. We wanted to get established before we went to Paul. Tom said no initially, and continued to say no throughout my whole 8 years of running Big Finish. The moment I left, he said yes. Thanks, Tom.
That was a good question.
Thanks for that, mate. And that was really how we got started, and we started off doing these little bi-monthly releases, because Jason was understandably going, well, let's not go mad. I wanted to go mad and say, let's do 20 releases a day. And he said, let's do one release every 2 months. So, all right then, if you insist. And then we very quickly went monthly when we realized that this was working.
Yeah, oh, very much so. So I wrote a blurb for the program when I described, I don't know if you had a chance to read it, when I described what this panel was going to be about, and Billy had asked me to describe what you think this is about. I'm going to read it to you,
okay,
and then we'll talk about something that part of this. I wrote Big Finish, the Gary Russell years, synonymous with innovation and experimentation. The early days of Big Finish were known for exciting stories that expanded what both Doctor Who and the audio medium could be. We were introduced to the new adventures of Bernie Summerfield without the Doctor, and solidified Lisa Barrowman as the iconic archaeologist for the next 2 decades and more. We were blessed with the return of Paul McGann as 8th Doctor, new and exciting Big Finish companions, as well as new stories with doctors we loved and missed. After years in the wilderness, Gary Russell, as creative director, Big Finish gave us some masterpieces and some stories that were questionable, but rarely were any of the early stories mediocre or boring. So what I wanted to say
That's very nice, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mad, but thank you.
What I wanted to touch base on and why I read that again is the early audios did seem to be quite innovative and quite stretching those boundaries of the medium and Doctor Who, and we had things even just Whispers of Terror, which was Colin's first audio, which was very much used the medium so well in terms of that sound monster, and things like Scherzo, things like Natural History of Fear,
I always wanted
Creatures
to
of
do
Beauty.
things like that.
Yeah.
I liked stretching stuff. I liked doing the weird. And you could only do the weird and the wonderful once in a blue moon, because if everything was weird and wonderful, then everyone gets bored very quickly. So, but to have, you know, a story that plays with the medium, I mean, Whispers of Terror, yes, it has a sound monster, but I think far more, if you haven't heard these stories, I'm afraid you're going to get lots of spoilers. The lovely thing about Whispers of Terror is it has a character in it that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Who talks all the way through it, and there's only one person he ever talks to, and you don't realise it, that the only person that is talking to this character is one other character, and then you realise, oh, he doesn't exist. And that kind of thing's clever. Another very clever one, I think, for that was Nev Fountain's Omega, where you have an entire story with Peter Davison's Doctor, and then at the end of episode 3, Peter Davison's Doctor actually turns up, and you go, oh, so who have we been listening to for the last 3 episodes? That kind of thing, I think, is very, very clever. And you can't do that on TV, and the whole point of doing what we were going to do with the audio medium, for me, was always to try and do stuff that you couldn't do in a book and you couldn't do on telly. There's no point in taking a medium as interesting as audio and just regurgitating a TV story. So I always tried to find, where possible, new and exciting things to do with audio.
And you did. Life 34.
That's one of my all-time favourites.
So well done. I just listened to it again a couple weeks ago, and it just, all of these stories, so many of these stories, you know, you did them so long ago, and they feel like you could have done them. I mean, Live 34, Fearmonger, you could have done them
Last week.
Yeah, last week, and they would have been, and they're relevant.
Yes.
And that's
Fearmonger, I think, is astonishingly
more relevant.
relevant.
In fact, I think it's more relevant now than it was then.
Yes.
So it's so great to have these. And you had some great writers early on. You had really terrific writers. You had yourself and Nick. Who
You didn't have me, because I didn't write.
Well, you had Nick, who wrote quite a bit, and
Yep.
of course you had Paul Cornell from Benny, but you had like Steve Lyons, Justin Richard, Jack Rayner, a lot of these.
Well, I, obviously at the beginning, we started off, you have to sort of find people that the BBC are going to say yes to. So if you go through all the people who've written their books, they're kind of going to say, yes, you can use those writers. So that's you know, the first year or so, the first 2 years really. The only people I think who hadn't done a BBC book was probably Nick Briggs and Nick Pegg. I think everyone else had sort of been involved with the book side of it. But then after a while, we started to spread out. We suddenly found we had, through no invitation, we had a slush pile. People were sending us in ideas. And you suddenly went, oh, all right then, we ought to use that. Other people would say, oh God, the last thing you want to do is take stories out of a slush pile and commission people to do things. I don't agree with that. My whole reason for doing Big Finish was to find new writers and new actors and directors, but particularly new writers, and find them, and that's what we did. And that's how we found someone like, say, like Joe Lidster, you know, who just submitted a story on spec, and I went, yeah, I'll have that, thank you very much. I mean, there were a couple that we did it with who weren't as successful, but that's the risk you take, and I'm a great believer that, you know, if you don't take risks, if you play everything safe, it gets a bit dull. That's why I was quite keen, I mean, I'm not saying that I never did it, but I was quite keen not to fall back on old monsters too often. So we had, because of the deal we had with Terry Nations people, which was the most astonishing thing to actually get a deal with Terry Nations people, they did say we want a story a year, and we were like, yeah, well, that's not a problem. And we had a couple of Cybermen stories every so often. Beyond that, really and truly, I did an Ice Warrior and a Silurian and a Nymon story. And that was pretty much it as far as old monsters were concerned for my 8 years. I kind of, for me, it was all about finding new and interesting things to do. And as you say, some of them don't always work, but most of them, I think, pretty much did.
Yeah, and what was nice about when you did use those monsters, because you didn't use them frequently, when you did, the stories warranted it. They were good. They were exciting. It was a good story to have them there. It wasn't just, oh, here's another dog story.
And it was always quite fun to cheat and put up a front cover in advance that didn't have a sideman on it, and the eventual front cover did have a sideman on it, but you were keeping that from people and things like that. That was always fun. And the artists didn't always agree with me that it was fun that they had to do 2 covers, thank you very much, but I always think it was quite fun.
And then because of that, I think we had spare parts, which is still when people when like voting goes for best Big Finish stories, that always comes up in the top 1, 2. It was the phantom between that and Chimes of Midnight. They seem to vie for the top. So that seems to was a good decision.
Spare parts came about because
I
really wanted to do an origin of the Cybermen, and I wanted 10th Planet Cybermen because I think on audio they sound interesting. And Mark Platt came up with a brilliant idea. It was very dark idea for a story. Originally there was another character in it, the Grinder Man, who went round stealing children off the streets and grinding them up to be turned into baby Cybermen. And I remember saying to Mark, this story is already pretty out there. Let's not have, he was doing the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang taken to an extreme level. And I said, let's not do that. So there's one throwaway reference, I think, in the script to the Grinder Man will come and get you in a sort of nursery rhyme kind of way. But in the original, the Grinder Man actually did exist. And he was going around being very, very unpleasant. And of course got his just desserts and turned into a Cyberman himself in the end. And the thing that I think with spare parts that I loved that we never expanded on was the cyber horses.
Yeah.
Which again is a terribly visual thing, and I remember saying to Mark, that's quite it's an interesting thing to do on audio, to have cyber horses, because other than someone saying, oh, it's a cyber horse, which I always did my damnedest to avoid anyone ever having to say things like that. The worst thing you can ever have in audio is someone going, I see that gun you're holding and pointing at me. And you have to find all sorts of amazing ways to get around things to avoid exposition. And having cyber horses really was going to be quite difficult. So we didn't. We just had the cyber horses there, and if you got that they were cyber horses, that was fine. They made sorts of cyber neighing sounds. And it was just there, it was just part of the general background ambience to that story. And I thought that was really nice. It was very clever spare parts. Don't do me, all to do with Mark.
It was brilliant, and Sally Nivette in that story is phenomenal. To hear her do something so different than what most fandom have seen her do was
Blake
fantastic. Yeah.
I like casting that sort of way as well. I mean, the fun thing for me for doing Big Finish was directing. It was always my favourite thing. I love casting. I'd like to have been a casting director, I think. And yes, so getting in touch with Sally, who I had met at a Blake 7 convention, when I'd met Paul and Gown. Basically, I've got most people from Blake 7 in at some point during those early days. And my biggest memory of Sally on that, she was only in for one day. It was a 2-day record, but she was actually only in for one day. She brought her dog with her, which we weren't quite expecting. This massive, slightly ancient Labrador that she would go, is it all right if I leave him in the control room with you, so that when I'm in the booth recording, he can hear my voice and he won't be worried? And I was like, I'm sure it's that. And I said to Toby, is Toby who ran the moat, I said, is this a problem? And he went, as long as it doesn't peel over the floor. And Sally Nivette went, no, he doesn't do that very often. And I thought, that is not what you want to be telling us. Really is not what you want to be telling us. Because we sat there going, is he peed on the floor yet? No, not yet. Oh, that's good.
And to that, let's talk about Paul McGann.
Yes.
Okay, so you said it was a little difficult getting Paul, and that was my
question. No,
question.
it wasn't difficult.
Okay.
It wasn't difficult. It was just something we didn't do. We deliberately didn't do at the beginning. We knew that we needed to get a certain amount of stuff under our belt. Because you see, with Colin, Sylvester and Peter, I'd known them for donkey's years through conventions and interviewing them and being friends with them. Paul we didn't know. Paul was a complete unknown to us at all. So we thought it was better to have a sort of array of product that we'd be able to go to his agent and say, look, we've been doing this for a couple of years. Would Paul be interested? And we got some scripts together that if need be, we could repurpose elsewhere if we wanted to. And we took them to, I think Jason sent them into Paul's agent. And it took about half an hour before Paul's agent came out and said, yeah, Paul's up for this, definitely. Yeah, we'll do that. And we were setting ourselves up for a sort of elongated battle here. We thought, oh, it's gonna go on. No, he was all over it. There were certain, things he needed, like we had to go to Bristol to record, which is we were based in London. Bristol's 2 hours west London. We had to traipse up there and put ourselves in hotel rooms and put the actors up and everything. That was expensive, because Paul wanted to work in Bristol where he lived. He didn't want to come to London. But that's cool, that's fine. It got us Paul and it was worth it. And in the end, eventually, Paul did start coming to London. Yes, we won. So yeah, it wasn't difficult. It wasn't as difficult getting him as we thought. But he was very busy. So it was always a case of, Paul, we need to do another. Well, this is why with his stuff, we tended to do them in little seasons. Everyone else was spread, and then we do 4 Pauls together, or 6 Pauls together. Just because that's how we were going to record them. And we did them a bit like rep theatre. We got a group of people together and we said, right, we're all going up to Bristol for a week and we will do all of these plays and you'll all be in all of them. And that was quite a fun way of doing it. The best thing of all was on the end of the first week when we were doing Minuet in Hell. And don't need to say any more than that. And we were thinking, has he enjoyed himself? Because Paul's a very hard man to read. He doesn't exactly wear his emotions on his sleeve. And he turned around to us sort of about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and just went, so when are we doing the next lot then? And we were like, yes, we've got it.
That's nice, that's a nice feeling. I want to talk a little bit about the pairing of Colin Baker and Maggie Stable.
Mm-hmm.
So Evelyn really was, other than, even before Charlie Paul, right?
Yep.
So she was really the first Big Finish companion.
Mm-hmm.
The choice to pair Colin with an older woman, first of all, she says she's 55. I am 54. So it seems, she seems a lot older, 55, but other than that, to pair Colin with an older companion, it was a brilliant pairing.
The reason she was 55 is because in the UK, if she'd been much older, she would have been forced into retirement. So 55 was sort of getting towards the end of her life as a university lecturer. By 60, they'd have been kicking her out. So that's why she's 55. Maggie would have been 62, 63, I think, at that point. Why did we do it? Because it was Maggie. Simple as that. I decided to create a new... So Colin we'd done Whispers of Terror. And Whispers of Terror is a very traditional Sixth Doctor story, in which the Doctor says, what 3 times and things like that, which Colin don't like. And he was very good at sitting me down and going, right, we've done that now. Now can we do my version of the Sixth Doctor going forward? And I was like, of course we can. And that evolved and was talking and all this sort of stuff. And he didn't suggest a new companion at all, because he had Nicola and later on, of course, we had Bonnie as well. But I could see he wanted to try new things. And I had at the back of my head, I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting, we can do this, to have an older companion rather. I was always remembering something Tom Baker once said. He wanted Miriam Margolyes as a companion.
Oh.
But then also Tom Baker wanted Talking Cabbage as a companion. So, some of his ideas are out there. But I'd had that in the back of my head. I thought, actually, for Colin, that would work quite well, a sort of Miriam Margolyes sort of character. And was at a convention in, Kathy, where were we? Minneapolis. And I sat around we were sitting in the pool, because it had a swimming pool, and we were all gathered around the pool. And Kathy was there, and Sean Lyon was there, and quite a few other people local to that, because it was Convergence, wasn't it? And I said, look, I've created this character called Evelyn Smythe. What do we all think about having an older companion? And this group of people I was with were throwing ideas around, saying, well, you do this or don't do that. And that was really good. And I went back home and I wrote all this out, all the bits I thought, they were really good ideas. I'll say they're all mine. Those are really terrible ideas. They were all Kathy's. And you know, because that's the kind of person I am. The only thing I knew when we were creating Maggie, we were creating Evelyn for is it was going to be Maggie. It was created for Maggie.
Okay.
If we hadn't had Maggie, I don't think I would have sat down and thought about creating an old companion.
Okay.
It was like, because she's so brilliant and she's such a great actress. And then you just had this thing of, will she get on with Colin? And so we did Marrying Conspiracy, and Jack wrote it, Jack Rayner, and she created this brilliant character and the whole setup and everything. And there we were in the studio, and for some insane reason I will never understand, Jason had decided to find out whether or not to save money, we could actually do a 2-disc release in one day. And I was going, that is impossible. We have a hard enough job doing a 2-disc release in 2 days. No, I want to see if we can do it in one day. So it was my job as a director to get this all done in one day. It was also my job as a producer to prove to Jason that it couldn't be done. And bugger me if I didn't have Colin and Maggie getting everything right on the first take. And we stormed through it, the whole thing in one day, and I was like, And I said to them afterwards, I said, for goodness sake, if Jason says, how did it go doing it all in one day? Tell him it went terribly. And Colin went, yeah, absolutely. And then Jason turned up. Jason tends to always turn up at the studios, but always towards the end, because he had no interest in being there, and all he did was come and pay people, which made him very popular with them. And he walked in, and Colin just went, hey gallery, we are never doing this in one day again. And I said, thank you, Colin. But he and Maggie just fired off each other. They're both intellectuals. They're both incredibly smart people. They both love wordplay. And Jack had written a certain amount of that in the story. But they were developing stuff. They were having fun playing those parts. And at that recording, I'd invited Nick Pegg to come along. In fact, he's in it. He and Barney, I think, were both in it in different parts. And I knew they were writing the next one. And that was very useful because they could immediately see the rapport between Colin and Maggie. And as a result, Spectre of Lanyon Moore is just the two of them, boom, 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 boom. It's just brilliant. And everyone picked up on that, and everyone wanted to. So many of these writers would go, oh, thank you for letting me do that. Now can I do a Colin and Evelyn? And I go, well, there are plays other than Colin and Evelyn plays, you know? Peter Davison has some plays, and Sylvester McCoy has yeah, can I do a Colin and Evelyn? Because Evelyn's so great, she's so great. Which is lovely. But that started our thing off. It proved to us that we could do our own companions. People would accept a new companion. Obviously with McGann we needed one anyway, with Charlie and later Charlie and Carrots. So that was fine, but then it also opened the door to Erimem and Hex. Yeah, that was it for the ones I created.
Were having companions like Hex and Erimem, were they always the plan? Or so it was the success of...
Erimem wasn't. Erimem absolutely wasn't. Erimem was a case of, we had the script, and Ian wrote a really, really good script, and Jason knew Caroline Morris, and he wanted to get Caroline a job, and I said, well, there's this nice part coming up in this, and we were recording it, and there was an absolute frisson between Peter and Nicola and Caroline, and I was in the studio directing it, and Ian McLaughlin wasn't there, I don't think, but I phoned him, and I said, can I change the end of your play? And he said, what do you mean? I said, if it's all right with you, can I take RMM with them and see how it goes? Might only be for a couple of stories. Of course, Ian, my partner, was like, of course you can. I was like, phew, doesn't want money, that's good. And I said to Jason, look, I'm thinking, look at the way Caroline works with these two. I think we've got a good team here, because there's a real sisterly thing between Perry and RMM, and it frees the Doctor to go off and do one storyline, and those two can have a great deal of fun doing another storyline. Because again, Peter always wanted to do something different. He didn't just want to recreate what he'd done on telly. He always felt that on TV, he spent too much time trying to keep Tegan and Nissa and Adric and Turlough in place and not going off and actually being the Doctor. And he'd said that to me, and I thought, yes, I can see that. So I want to give you more things where you can go off and be the Doctor, and then Perry and RMM can get in trouble, like a couple of kids. Because of course you've got to remember that Perry was only meant to be 17 or 18 at that point, you know. So I like this idea of these sort of two teenage girls going off and having exciting adventures while the Doctor saves the world. So that was quite nice. And then Hex came about simply because I wanted the similar sort of thing. I wanted to give, we had this situation that you had Sylvester and Sophie, who knew each other so well that they could virtually come into a studio and do each other's lines. And I just wanted to shake that up a bit and give them something else. And I thought, I liked the idea that we'd done the whole thing with the Rapture, so we'd aged McShane up. Thank God we stopped the McShane idea quite quickly. But we did it, so we were aging her up a bit. And I thought it was quite interesting that she had been taught how to be Ace by the Doctor. The idea that she then had someone she would teach how to be a companion in Hex. And that part was absolutely created for Philip Olivier. It was, you know, there was no one else in the running for it at all. He's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Speaking of the Rapture, Ace's brother.
Yes.
That has never been picked up again.
Well, not my fault. If I hadn't left Big Finish, when I did, it would have been, because one of the things I was planning was an Ace and Hex Forge miniseries without the Doctor. And we would have seen Liam again, and Liam would have been in that. But yes, after I left, nobody carried on with that. Shame, because David John, who played Liam, was Sophie's idea, because she enjoyed working with him so much in Survival. And she'd said, oh, if you're getting my brother in, you should get David to come and play it, because he and I get on really well, and it would be quite easy to do a brotherly, sisterly thing with him. So that's why we got David in. The idea of doing the brother is totally from Joe. When he submitted the Rapture, it wasn't a Sylvester and Sophie story. I can't tell you what it was. It might have been Peter and Nicola. And I remember saying to him, this feels like the sort of thing that this has got Sylvester and Sophie written all over it. Go think about it in those terms. So when he came to do that and he sent us the second draft of his outline in, suddenly the brother was there, and I was like, yeah, I'm up for that.
Yeah, it does work a lot better.
You can't. You've got to expand these people. You can't just leave them on a pause button just because we saw them on telly for 3 years and she never mentioned a brother. Does not mean she didn't have one. And I think you've got to take gambles and risks with these things. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I thought Liam was really good. I thought David played it well, and yes, he would have come back if I had not left Big Finish.
I would have loved to seen a Forge miniseries.
It would have been good.
That would have been really good.
We were quite a long way down developing that with Mark and Cav. It was fun.
Wow.
And that came out. The idea of doing that actually came out of we'd done a freebie for, it wasn't Doctor Who magazine. I think it was a subscriber freebie, which was just a team up of RMM and Perry and Hex and Ace.
Yes. It's like a casino, right?
Yeah.
Veiled Leopard.
Veiled Leopard.
It was a Doctor Who magazine.
That's right. It was DWM, was it? Yeah. And because that had been so much fun to do without doctors, so much more relaxing to be in the studio as well, that I just thought, that these two could actually, and the Forge was an obvious thing. So yeah, but it never happened.
Oh. Let's talk about Tom Baker. Not
Well-
much to talk about, huh?
Well, there's something to talk about from my point of view. We tried more than once. We sent him at one point some of our scripts. We sent him Spectre of Elain Moore. We sent him Stones of Venice. And one other. Because I thought they would be the most sort of show of breadth that would interest him. And he was at a convention in the UK, which we were at as well. And he said on stage, somebody asked him obviously, are you ever going to do Big Finish? And he said, oh no, they sent me these scripts and I let them fall in the dustbin where they belonged. And I was sitting in the audience and I just thought, thanks Tom. You know, I know you did that because you might think that's a good funny joke, but actually that's really insulting. And so I was quite happy not to ask Tom ever again. Jason, however, sensibly, being the money man, said, no, we've got to keep asking Tom. Then Sharda happened. The BBC asked us to do Sharda for the 40th anniversary. And so we went to Tom again and said, look, you know, will you do this? And he said, no, I don't want to do Big Finish. And I thought, okay. And that was the last time we ever asked him while I was at the company. And I thought, great, we'll do it Paul McGann and have a lot of fun then. And you know, we'd done Zagreus, so I knew that Paul and Lala worked very well together. So that was always good fun. But the moment I left Big Finish, Nick Briggs, bless him, was able to talk to Tom and get him on board, and he's been brilliant ever since.
And raves, that's all he can do is rave about
Yes.
Big Finish. So
Yes. I think he just needed it to happen at the right time for him, and those first 8 years were not the right time for Tom. And year 9 was.
Now there's been rumors that Spectre of Elain Moore was actually, you know, written with him in mind.
No,
Hopefully.
no, absolutely not. Spectre of Elain Moore was written as the second Colin and Maggie story. No, we never wrote a single script for Tom ever. What was the point? We wouldn't waste my time. It was just that was one of the ones we showed him and said, this is the kind of thing we do, and he didn't like it.
Yeah. Well, he didn't read it.
Well, yeah, there is that. There is that. I'm fairly certain he didn't read it.
So we touched base on the types of stories you were writing, a lot of like innovation or interesting things, or I know, well, Bernice breaking fourth wall, things that you were doing. Was there ever any pushback for the BBC before the show came on the air about the kinds of stories you were doing?
No. For the first 6 years of Big Finish, the BBC were happy with everything we did. The only time we got any pushback was when the show was announced as coming back. And previously, what would happen is I would have to submit a synopsis of a story. They never wanted to see scripts, but they wanted to see a synopsis. Well, of course, at the time running that side of the BBC was either Steve Cole or Jack Rayner. Conveniently, people who worked for me. So it was all a bit incestuous and a bit naughty. But they never came back and said no to anything. However, when the show was announced as coming back, and I immediately thought, well, we're dead in the water, no one's going to want Big Finish, now there's a new TV show. Thankfully, I was wrong. Suddenly, my panel of people reading our synopsis went from one person, who was a mate, to 7 or 8 people who I'd never heard of, all of whom, of course, had to chip in with this and chip in with that. And I can only, off the top of my head, however, think of 2 occasions where we were asked to change something. One was directly from Russell. He phoned me up and said, could you not put Queen Victoria in Other Lives? And so Gary Hopkins changed it to Duke of Wellington. He said, I'm doing a Queen Victoria story. I then watched the whole of the Christopher Eccleston years and went, there's no bloody Queen Victoria story here. And then she turned up in the first tenant, and I went, my God, you were working well enough in advance, weren't you? And the only other thing, it wasn't a change, it was asking us to be very careful. And that was Live 34. Because there are words in Live 34 like terrorist. And the BBC is very icky about terrorists being portrayed as heroic. It's one thing to be a freedom fighter, it's a different thing to call yourself a terrorist. And so they did ask us to not, they didn't say don't use the word terrorist, they said can you not make the terrorists look fantastic and heroic? And I was like, it's kind of the story. So I changed them all to freedom fighters, and I think the only person that calls them the terrorist is the bad guy. And that was the only two things that they ever asked us to change. I can't think of anything else. I do think now that there are certain stories towards the end of my run that you wouldn't get away with today. There is no way on earth Night Thoughts would get past the BBC today. How it got past the BBC back then is beyond me. I was so lucky because it's one of my favourites. I love it. This thing about a little toy rabbit that pulls people's eyes out is just fantastic. And I thought, we're not going to get away with this, and we did. And I was like, right, quick, make it. Let's get it in studio. Let's release it before they change their minds. And I know you wouldn't get away with that now. And I think, to be honest, they're probably right. I love Night Thoughts, I really do, but it is dark. It's really dark.
There's also a rumor that story was, the idea for that story was originally an idea for the season 24? No, season 29.
Yeah, Ed says it was,
Sylvester.
Ed says it was certainly something he submitted to the production team back in 1989, yes. How far it got is anyone's guess. But yes, that's what he said to me, was that it was something he'd submitted. I don't know whether it was or not, I didn't really care. It was such a good story. I can't see them making that in 1989 either. God. That rabbit, I've got that rabbit.
Oh, really?
The rabbit
On
from
the
the
cover?
front cover is sitting on my dresser at home. There's a little bit of CG added to that rabbit, but it's got its eyes popping out, and Lee Binding, to make it look really icky and yucky on that cover, he poured cold coffee all over it, and that's why it looks really stained and horrible, and its eyes hang out, and it's staring at me every night. Because if I can see it, I know where it is. And then Lizzie Hopley, who played the rabbit, she gave me a female version of it.
Oh.
So she went out and found exactly the same toy rabbit that Lee had bought off the shop and turned into this one. And she sewed a little pinny dress on it and everything, and she pulled its eyes out and soaked it in coffee. So I have a male and female rabbit from that story staring at me.
Lost Stories.
Not many.
Was that your range? Were you still there when they did the Lost Stories?
Oh, I see. No. That's after my time. The only thing I would not. I'll be careful when I say this. I always said when I was a Big Finish, I wouldn't recast people. And so doing things like Lost Stories, doing things like audio versions of new adventure books, and doing stuff with people playing
The recasts.
the recasts, to my mind, for me, is not what I set out to do Big Finish for. I don't see the point of doing an audio version of a novel, because that's a novel and we do audios, and but that's just me. And I'm wrong, because they made a huge success of them, and this is likewise the Lost Stories. It didn't appeal to me. I think Jason talked to me about it at one point and said, why don't we make, I think at that point we were thinking specifically of Foe from the Future, and he said, why don't we find, no it wasn't, it was Killer Cats of Ginseng, that's what we wanted to find.
And they never did it.
It's because no script existed.
Yeah.
But that was what we were talking about, and I was like, no, that's taking one of my slots away that can be done with a whole new and exciting thing with a new writer, rather than regurgitating something else. It just didn't appeal to me. But it appeals to other people, and people buy them and love them, so I'm the one that was in the wrong.
I don't know if you're in the wrong.
Well, think it must have been because, they've done all these things and they're incredibly successful. And they probably could have done them a lot earlier if I'd been more flexible. But at that point, all I was doing was 12 big finishes a year, plus a couple of 4-part miniseries, and at least one of those every year was being handled by Nick, not me anyway. My slots were limited, and I was like, no, I want to do my stories the way I want to do them. And they were like, yes, Gary, patting me on the head. There you are, dear.
Let's talk about some of the spin-offs. Jago and Lightfoot.
After my time.
That was after your
Oh, a
time.
long time after me.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, well, let's not talk about
The only spin-offs I did was
Gallifrey. So
that
let's
one,
talk about
which is
Gallifrey.
my absolute favourite. Nick was doing Dalek Empire and Cybermen. Ian Farrington did Unit, and I did Davros. And those are the
Brilliant.
only spin-offs that happened during my time, I think. Oh yeah,
Sarah Jane.
Sarah Jane did 2 years of Sarah. Well, I did 1 year of Sarah Jane, then I left, and then John did the second year of Sarah Jane. Yes, Sarah Jane. Yes. Yes. That was interesting.
In what way?
Because it was Liz's idea.
Oh.
Well, no, we went to Liz and said, how do you fancy doing a Sarah Jane series? And she came back and said, I think it should be this, and this. Of which I was very happy to do because that worked fine for me. And all I said to her is, I want to make the villain Miss Winters. And she was like, oh, that's fantastic, I can put you in touch with Patricia. That was another example of a front cover being released without Miss Winters on it, and then finally the real cover has her on it. And it just took a long time to pull together because, as I was saying on Friday night about Sarah Jane Adventures, Liz was incredibly protective of the character and had no qualms about saying she thought something was crap if she thought it was crap, and that Sarah Jane wouldn't say this or Sarah Jane wouldn't do this. So that series took a while to put together, and it was all the better for it. To have that input from an actor who's so passionate about it, it was a godsend. And then that meant that when I went to work on Sarah Jane Adventures up in Cardiff, we just carried on where we left off.
That's, yeah. Any questions from the audience?
So you mentioned Gallifrey. Yeah.
My favourite.
So, how did you come up with that, and also how did you go about coming up with the character of Narvin? Because I know he's still one of the loved characters that they finished to this day. So.
Well, Gallifrey came out very simply. Since I was about 14, I always thought that Doctor Who should have an entire series set on Gallifrey. I thought it was mad that they never did that, which is probably why I've never been put in charge of the TV show. So this is my opportunity to do what I'd always wanted to do, which was a Gallifrey show. And I said to Jason, it needs to be the West Wing meets 24. And he looked at me in a kind of, what? And I said, trust me, I can make that work. It's about politics, it's about more politics, and there's a little action, and there's some terrorists, some freedom fighters. And he bought into that and let me run with it. And it came out really because when we did Zagreus, Lala and Lou, who had never met in their entire lives at that point, were in the studio together, and they hit it off so much that Lala said, Lou and I want to do a series together for you. And I was like, well, funnily enough, you've just given me the thing I can take to Jason and say, I've always wanted this Gallifrey series. Well, now I've got Lou and Lala on board for it. And so that's what we did. And Narvin came about because Alan, who wrote the first couple of episodes, we'd already had Van Sel in a couple of the Doctor Who's, and then I killed him off. Tony Keach, who played Van Sel, really appreciated that so much. So we couldn't use Van Sel. So we created Narvin, and Sean, it was created for Sean. I mean, I'd worked with Sean previously. I loved him. He's a fantastic actor. So I knew, I'd said to Alan Barnes, it's going to be played by Sean. And he was like, and Alan had been up when we'd done Natural History of Fear, so he'd known Sean. And he went, oh, right, brilliant. Then I can see how we can make that work. And then as time went on, and particularly when I went back to Big Finish to do seasons 4, 5, and 6, I was very keen that there should be this smouldering thing between Leela and Narvin, this unrequited sort of, because the lovely thing about Narvin is he hates Leela and he hates Romana and he hates anything that is deviating from the norm of Gallifreyan society, and yet he respects Romana and he's mad in love with Leela, and that's a real problem for him, and it's a real sort of difficult life for him, and I loved it, and I love giving Narvin lots of difficult things to do. And Sean rises to the challenge every single time, so it's great. We had such a good cast. You know, again, I knew immediately I wanted to put Miles in it as Braxitel.
I was going to ask, Miles is Braxitel is one of my favorite characters, and Miles, just his voice.
And it gave us the opportunity to, I said to Miles right from the work, I said, this is a different Braxitel to the one you play in the Bennies. And he looked at me and I don't understand what you mean. I said, all become clear.
Or not.
There are a lot of Braxitels all around the universe. I said, one day there will be a point where you have a telephone conversation with 6 different Braxitels across different parallel universes. And Miles looked at me and I don't understand a word you just said. That's fine. And occasionally he says, why is Braxitel saying this? Because in that Benny story, and I go, you're not the same Braxitel? And he'd go, oh, all right then. You say But it was lovely. And then we got Mary Tam, and that was so nice to have Mary come in and play original Romana, but not. And there's a lovely thing that, you know, Louise and Mary had been at drama school together, so they were good friends. Lala and Mary had known each other for years, so they were very good friends. By this point, Lala and Lou were absolutely inseparable, which is really weird because they are 2 of the most diametrically opposite people you could ever meet. Because, you know, Lou is this hippie chick with a holistic medicine and everything, and Lala is this scientist, and yet they just get on so well together, but they've got nothing in common. And then on top of that, we had Miles and we had Sean, and we had, oh, he's going to kill me, I forgot his name. Yeah, it won't help me. It's the guy that played Matthias. He was a great actor. Played the Croaker as well.
Wickham?
No.
No.
Although he's good. Yes, we brought him back lots and lots of. And then yes, and I had great fun with Steve Wickham by saying you're the man who's going to be responsible for the Time War. We're going to make Valiers the man at the beginning of Genesis of the Daleks, and I said to Sean, I said, you're going to fuck it all up. You are going to send Valiers back to talk to the Doctor, and that's going to start the Time War. And I said to Steve Wickham, I said, and you're the person that does it. It's all going to be your fault. Oh, those were fun days. And we could get away with things like that. But yeah, that was good. Gallifrey, I love it. It's a brilliant series. Absolutely brilliant.
Well, go ahead, Eric.
So actually, you dovetailed perfectly into my question. So the new series comes out, this whole idea of the Time War is just like dropped on all of us, which is the perfect sort of like bridge between the 2 series, because anything goes and it's the show's a mystery again. And you're doing Gallifrey and all this stuff, and they're like, Time War, what is this? How did you work with Russell to sort of like be able to do anything, because he's got to keep everything in the vest as he's slowly revealing?
All I said to Russell was, when we got to the end of season 3 of Gallifrey, where we imply the Time War, but we don't actually feature it because that happens in season 6. But I said, we're going to do this thing where we're going to take Lala and Romana and Narvin and Braxel, and they're going to be in this little bubble separated from everything. And he said, good. He said, because I don't really like to think the fact that, because he was like, everyone dies in the Time War. And I was like, well, that means you just killed Romana and Leela. And he said, everyone dies in the Time War except the people you've put in that nice little bubble. And get works for me, Russell. Absolutely works for me. Which is why when we went back a few years later to do season 4, we did it with all the alternate Gallifreys, so that they were separated from the Time War, and then they get back to Gallifrey, and the Time War is actually started by them. So they spent ages trying to get away from this thing, and then they actually go, stupid Narvin goes and sets it up. But yeah, he just said, no, thank you for doing that. That means that they're not dead. That's good.
I have one more question.
This is a bit of a weird one, and it's kind of too, but not quite. What's like the weirdest idea that's been brought to you that like other ones like you were like, oh hell no, or like let's do this, or and to like, is there any like crazy idea you wish you could have done?
The craziest idea that was brought to me that we said yes to was Natural History of Fear. Which is typical Jim Mortimer, in that you look at it and you go, how am I going to do this? And has that lovely twist at the end that you could only do on audio. That was definitely the weirdest thing that anyone brought to me. Briggsy with Creatures of Beauty, saying he wanted to do a story that was completely out of order, and only when you get to the very end will you actually understand what's been going on. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. The only story that was brought to me that we did, and I regretted not, perhaps, no, I don't regret it. I'm not that fond of Ish. I think that was an interesting idea that perhaps didn't go as far as it should have done. It sort of didn't quite live up to its potential. I don't remember so much that anything was brought to me that we didn't make, other than the fact that I had commissioned a number of stories for around the 100 mark, that because I left Big Finish to go and work in Cardiff, those scripts got abandoned. And there were some quite interesting ones in there. I was disappointed that they threw away.
Oh, I would love to see them.
There was Claws of Kali, which was written by not Robin Mukherjee, but it was all about India and the Indian gods and everything like that. I thought it was brilliant. And we had a story by Stephen Baxter as well, which I was quite impressed with. We got Stephen Baxter to write for us, and that got dropped. But yeah, there's nothing really that was brought to me during the main part of my run that I went no. There are things I said no to, but I would say it straight away that I can't remember anything that really we went into development with and then dropped.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. We're 2 minutes over. I want to say thank you, Gary.
My
This has
pleasure.
been
Thank you for listening.
wonderful. I could talk to you for hours about all this, so 5. And if you don't know, some of you don't know some of the stories we talked about, please go look for them. They're not very expensive on the Big Finish website. They're excellent stories.
Listen to the whole Gallifrey series, it's fantastic.
Yes, I would go along with that.
It is actually one of my favorite things that Big Finish covered.
It's the thing I'm proudest of, without doubt. Those first 6 series of Gallifrey are good.
Series 4 is my favorite.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.